It began with a gut feeling. That's always how it starts, isn't it? Some imperceptible shift in tone, an unusual softness in her voice when she would say, "I'll be having lunch with a friend." The kind of softness you only notice if you've heard the sharp edges before, those you thought you had smoothed over with years of devotion. Sarah and I had been married for 8 years. 8 years of morning coffees, whispered dreams, and the silent understanding that comes from knowing someone completely. We had built a life together in our modest home, filled with memories and moments I thought would last forever. I believed we were solid. Sure, we had our disagreements, but who doesn't? I attributed it to life's natural wear and tear. That was before the late-night text I accidentally glimpsed while her phone rested on the couch beside me. "Can't stop thinking about today. When can I see you again?" The message came from a number I didn't recognize, illuminating the screen with an intimacy that felt like a betrayal. When I asked about it, she brushed it off with a nervous laugh. "It's nothing, just a group chat. You know how girls can be." Her eyes didn't quite meet mine. I nodded but didn't press further. That night, lying in bed beside her, I knew something was wrong. Something was very wrong. It wasn't until weeks later, when her lunch dates became more frequent and her excuses vaguer, that I decided to act. I noticed other changes too: new clothes, a different perfume. I'm not proud of it, but I went through her phone when she left it unattended. The texts I found weren't merely suggestive, they were explicit. Her friend was someone named Thomas, and judging by their exchanges, the lunch dates were far more than quick sandwiches and small talk. I felt a rush of nausea and anger, followed by a crushing wave of humiliation. My wife, my Sarah, was having an affair. And it wasn't just a fling. These weren't messages of mere physical attraction, they were saturated with emotional intimacy, the kind of connection we used to have, the kind I thought was still ours. For a week, I carried this knowledge in silence, a burning coal lodged in my chest. I watched her go through the motions of our marriage, cooking dinner, asking about my day, kissing me goodnight, all while knowing she was living a double life. I was trying to determine what to do. Confront her? Pack my bags and leave? Beg her to explain? I did none of those things. Instead, I plotted, carefully and methodically. Through social media research, I discovered Thomas was her colleague, a sales representative for a company she'd collaborated with on a project. He was married too, with a profile full of family photos. I found his wife, Rebecca, on Facebook, a petite brunette with kind eyes and 2 children under 5. My heart broke for her, but my sympathy didn't deter me from moving forward. First, I hired a private investigator, a grizzled man named Jack. Seen it 1,000 times, he told me when I explained my suspicions. 2 weeks later, Jack's photos confirmed everything: pictures of them leaving a hotel together, arms brushing, faces lit with laughter. He'd even captured them kissing in her car in the parking lot of a restaurant where she'd told me she was meeting her college roommate. Hard, undeniable proof. Next, I reached out to Rebecca. I spent hours drafting the message, trying to find the least painful way to shatter someone's world. "Hi Rebecca, this is difficult to communicate, but I believe your husband Thomas is having an affair with my wife Sarah. I've attached photos. I'm sorry to be the bearer of such news." Her response came an hour later: "Thank you for telling me." The next day, she called, and we talked for over an hour, 2 strangers united by betrayal. The wheels were in motion. But I had one last card to play. I wanted Sarah to witness the consequences of her betrayal. So I invited her to lunch on a day I knew she'd planned to meet Thomas. Jack had provided me with their regular schedule. "Let's have a date," I said, forcing a smile across the breakfast table. Just the two of us. We haven't done that in a while. She seemed relieved, almost eager when she finally looked up. That sounds wonderful, she said. Little did she know, it was the calm before the storm. The day arrived, cloudy and cool, matching my mood. I set the table meticulously, a crisp white tablecloth, our finest silverware, and 2 glasses of wine. On the surface, it looked like an attempt at rekindling romance. In reality, the centerpiece wasn't flowers but a manila envelope filled with every damning piece of evidence Jack had gathered. Sarah walked in smiling, her cheeks flushed from her supposed errand. She was wearing a dress I hadn't seen before, probably bought for Thomas, I thought bitterly. She froze when she saw the table, her eyes darting from the envelope to me. "What's this?" she asked, her voice unsteady, handbag still clutched to her side. I didn't answer. I just gestured for her to sit, my movements controlled despite the storm raging inside me. I slid the envelope across the table, the scrape of paper against wood loud in the silence. "Open it," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. She hesitated, her fingers trembling slightly as they reached for the envelope. She complied, her jaw tightening as she sifted through the photos and printouts of text messages. I watched her face pale, then flush with shame. "I can explain," she stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. The evidence was too overwhelming. "Explain?" I leaned back in my chair, my voice calm but razor-sharp. "Explain what? That you've been lying to me for months? That you've been sneaking around with a married man? That you've been treating our marriage like it's disposable?" Tears welled in her eyes, spilling over onto the damning photographs. "It's not like that," she whispered, a plea rather than a denial. "Then what is it like, Sarah?" I demanded, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay composed. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you've been having your cake and eating it too." She broke down sobbing, mumbling apologies that meant nothing. I let her cry, let her wallow in the mess she'd created. When she finally looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, I dropped the next bombshell. "I've spoken to Rebecca," I said, watching her face carefully. Her eyes widened in horror, the color draining from her face. "You what?" "She knows everything, just like I do. You've destroyed not one but 2 families, Sarah." At that moment, there was a knock at the door. Sarah's head whipped around, her expression a mix of fear and confusion. I stood and opened it to reveal Rebecca, her face calm but her eyes blazing with anger, and behind her, Thomas, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Sarah's face went pale. "What is this?" she whispered, half rising from her chair. "This," I said, with a cold satisfaction, "is closure." The confrontation that followed was ugly, the kind of raw emotional display that leaves everyone feeling exposed. Rebecca unleashed years of pent-up frustration on Thomas, who stood there stammering helplessly. She listed all the times he'd lied to her, all the family events he'd missed for work emergencies that were actually rendezvous with Sarah. Sarah tried to intervene, but Rebecca turned on her with the ferocity of a lioness protecting her cubs. "Don't you dare try to justify this," she snarled, pointing a shaking finger at Sarah. The words she used weren't fit for polite company, but they were honest, unfiltered by social niceties. Thomas finally tried to defend himself, spouting nonsense about feeling unappreciated at home, about how these things happen. I cut him off, disgust rising in my throat. "Unappreciated?" I laughed bitterly. "You have 2 beautiful children and a wife who would move heaven and earth for you, and this is how you repay her? By sneaking around with my wife?" By the end, everyone's emotions were frayed. Sarah and Thomas looked like broken shells of the people they'd been when they walked in. Rebecca and I exchanged a look, a silent acknowledgement that we both emerged stronger from this ordeal. The fallout was swift. Sarah packed her bags and moved out that evening. I filed for divorce the next day. Rebecca did the same. Thomas lost his job when Rebecca sent their employer copies of the evidence, citing the company's policy against workplace relationships. Sarah's reputation plummeted as word of the affair spread among our friends and family. They had no one to blame but themselves. The months that followed were a blur of legal meetings, asset divisions, and painful check-ins from friends and family. "How are you holding up?" became the question I dreaded most. As for me, I won't pretend it was easy. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, mornings when getting out of bed felt impossible. But with time, the anger faded, replaced by a quiet determination to rebuild my life. I started therapy, took up running, and reconnected with old friends who had fallen by the wayside during my marriage. A year later, I'm happier than I've been in years. I've moved to a new apartment, started a new job, even cautiously begun dating again. I've learned to value myself, to demand honesty and respect from those in my life. Sarah and Thomas? Last I heard, their relationship didn't survive the weight of the guilt and the harsh reality of building something new on such a broken foundation. Revenge may not be the healthiest motivation, but sometimes it's the catalyst we need to reclaim our power, to remind ourselves of our worth when others have made us forget. And reclaim it I did.